Okay, I've now started recording this session. So Ryan, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me today. I'll probably just quickly share my screen if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so here we go. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, I can see that fine.
Brilliant. So thanks for having me on today. I'm the CEO of RedFern Digital. We're an agency based out, headquartered in Shanghai and Hong Kong. And essentially we help brands, institutions with all things China digital. We're a full service agency spanning across owned media, paid media, tech, e-commerce, creative, and branding as well. So paid media being probably the bigger part of our agency, focused around advertising. We also do things such as offline events, production, and strategy. So pretty much everything needed for universities when they're operating in China, whether it be helping them with events when they're here, running their own media, helping them with paid media, or helping them with, for example, long tail advertising, which is one of the things that I'll talk about today. So today I'll be talking about how to move universities online, more from a marketing perspective, not from a teaching perspective, but basically different things that universities can do in order to engage with Chinese students, to increase lead generation, and also in terms of how they can better manage their own media. To drive enrollments and to create content that is specifically focused for different groups, whether that be someone that's interested in enrolling, a current student, or whether that be alumni. So we've seen a lot of change over the last 6 months globally. I think it's been a tough time for a number of categories, especially with education. So what we've seen, though, is still a lot of universities putting budget into being able to communicate with Chinese students so that when the borders do open again, there's still a clear emotional connection between the institution itself and Chinese students. So we've seen lots of, Australia has taken a very strong lead. We've seen from our side in terms of vice chancellors and leaders of the universities filming videos that were very specifically focused towards Chinese students, and showing that they care about the situation and that, you know, how things will be resolved in coming months. Other things that we've seen in terms of changes has also been, open days that have been held online, so virtual open days, different webinars that help students learn more about the university. They wouldn't necessarily have the chance now to travel to get the information that's needed. So basically, we've got a situation where we're driving traffic towards particular webinars and allowing students then to filter in for these kind of virtual open days. So that's pretty much what we've seen being a bigger change. And in terms of media spend as well, we haven't seen things slow down. We've seen universities actually looking to prepare more for the coming year in terms of the platforms that they're working on and the amount of budget that they're putting in. So firstly, why is digital marketing important for universities? Today, I'm going to run through a number of different things. So why is digital marketing important for universities? Looking at the student journey and how universities can intercept that student journey, and then also looking at how universities can optimize their digital marketing strategy. So first things first, I mean, why is it important? In terms of digital marketing, one thing that it enables universities to do is to easily contact prospective students through their main sources of information, which are through social media, through Baidu, through websites, kind of search here in China market. It allows for lead generation. Offline has often been good with delegations coming through over to China to meet with prospective students, but that's something that no longer can be done at this current time. So as a result of that, digital has really helped bridge that gap. It allows for universities to target more specific audiences. So to look at certain regions where they can profile, we get a lot of students from a certain region, maybe due to a particular partnership the university has. or due to certain demographics, or due to historical connections they might have with that region of China, or kind of the word of mouth that they've built. So it allows for universities to target them specific regions. And more than that, it provides a nationwide touch point for the university across China. And finally, it acts as brand validation. So if you look, when we work with universities, one thing we find that with students from a lot of other countries going to the English website and going through a lot of the English portals, a lot of students from different countries are more receptive to doing that. Though with China, due to the firewall, we've found that Chinese students prefer to talk to kind of the admissions staff in Chinese. They like to have content that they can run through in Chinese, and also an individual website as well, where they can get information irrelevant of their ability to speak English. So that's something as well that it's very important that a university shows that they have these things in place, whether that be on social media, whether that be across websites. So I think that, it's not a case of whether universities are doing much in terms of social media in China. I think the vast majority of them are. I think it's just about looking at what has been done and what more should be done. So currently, the average university has maybe 3 or 4 social media platforms that they're operating on. WeChat obviously being the most popular one. Weibo, given its preference to younger demographics and its promotional tool capabilities, and then Douyin. So Douyin obviously being having the lowest CPE, the cost per engagement last year, and really being kind of a driver in all things digital in China. They're kind of the 3 major platforms that the brands are using, and the universities are using, and this is for feeding current students information, news updates, holiday greetings, and then answering inquiries manually. So, and they're great. These are the major platforms. But today, what I'll be talking about is more on long tail advertising. I'll also be discussing how different ways that universities can cut down on the large number of inquiries that are coming through social media. I think the major thing that we hear with a lot of university staff is the difficulties in handling such large volumes of inquiries when campaigns have been run, and how agencies can help support that process. On top of that, further, it's about looking at the distinction between owned media and paid media, and how we are seeing more and more success with different types of paid media and programmatic advertising campaigns in comparison to owned media. So when we look at the student journey, it's not as simple as WeChat, Weibo, and Douyin. Actually, in China, there's hundreds and hundreds of apps that young people are using, that parents are using, depending on whether you're looking for an undergraduate or a postgraduate student to enroll. You can see here, for example, there's a number that are across studying. We have entertainment, covering music, videos, and music videos, and then also we have the more traditional social channels as well on the right? So we have WeChat, as mentioned before. We have Zhihu, which is very much a question and answer platform. Tieba, which is also about more question and answer. Xiaohongshu, which is more towards females, 90% female user base. So they're the more traditional ones, and I think what gets most of the attention, and a lot of what is towards the left and in the long tail gets kind of forgotten. Although they do have less users, the monthly average user on them sites are lesser than the big platforms. They still have a lot of capabilities in terms of advertising power. And so here you can see which ones we've circled, which ones have the ability to carry out programmatic advertising of some sort. So it really shows a diversity of where you can start to engage with students, especially when we're looking at platforms that are about studying, and that universities is definitely on the mind of the person within this application at that time. So definitely some of the study applications can be very useful for universities as well. And so the journey really starts out with being intercepted in a number of different ways. It might be through awareness. So first it might be, for example, on Bilibili, there might be different ads that have been run by the university, or introduction videos to the university that have been placed, or Weibo's promotional tool, Feng Sitong, which can have very good in terms of awareness. It has a CPM of about 5 RMB, so just under £1. It's about 70 pence per 1,000 views, does Weibo. So basically we have different platforms here where a student might be thinking of going to the UK, and then they come across a particular ad that then they click through to, and they might follow up to enroll, or it might put the university on their decision-making map, right? So other ones that are more from search include Zhihu and Baidu, right? So that's where a student is either looking at English universities, or they are looking at the university itself. So they will be searching and then come across information. So that's where the awareness then falls down into inquiry. Now, we find that generally the universities that we've worked with, inquiry is done very well, right? So there's a lot of own media platforms that have been established, Zhihu, for example, WeChat, Weibo, and there will be a Chinese website in most cases. But it's that awareness element of how do you drive more prospective students to them inquiries. I think that is really where universities need to focus more on programmatic advertising. And how SEM can be used as well to build the Chinese website and to build the amount of engagement that it gets. So, and then the final part, I think, is another problem that often we come across, where it's about how then do we take prospective students and drive them through in terms of enrolling, right? So an offer and then enrolling in the university in the application. Is it a landing page? Is it leading to an agency in the UK that deals with enrollment? How are universities then making that transition? So that's something as well that we think is important. And also when the student is going through the period of time, or the parents are going through the period of time of making the decision around the university, how can the own media play a part through personalized QR codes, through a number of different methodologies to help specifically target them groups of prospective students to make them feel it's the right university for them. And on top of that, it's important about how do we make all of these channels match, right? So you have your official WeChat account, official Weibo account. How do we, for using Fengzitong, for example, which is the promotional tool I mentioned before, going out using certain criteria to look for prospective students and then pulling them in through to a WeChat account. Weibo even has the options for targeting students that are, for example, in the UK doing an undergraduate from China, and you're able then to advertise what they could be doing for their postgraduate as well at your university, at different universities. So that's quite specific as well. There's different things that can be done, and then you can drive them through Weibo into your official WeChat account. So that's one thing that some universities have done. A lot of questions are generally asked through Baidu as a search engine, or Zhihu, and then that's where also you can intercept different students and try and link them again, either to your website. So creating this interlink between all of the different types of media is very important, so that a student can very easily go through the different types of media, not get lost, and feel that there's a strong cohesiveness in terms of the values, in terms of the USPs of the university, and in terms of trying to get different sources of information, because there's only so much a Weibo page can provide, right? So it's how do we then allow that student to click through to the website or to join the official account. So moving on to kind of the awareness side that I'd mentioned before, I think, the first things first, looking at how does the university stand out. So if you're doing programmatic advertising, one thing that's important is you have a number of different banners that you have to come up with. You have potential cost per action, so CPA models, where a balance is put into a particular application, and from that application, and every time someone is a lead or a student would leave their information because they're interested in the university, it then removes an amount from that balance. But you only really have one banner and one opportunity in them kind of situations, plus a potential landing page, depending on the application, for the student to learn about the university. And with there being so much competition, how do you frame that? So some of the main things is trying to understand what students are looking for in terms of from British universities, right? So understanding the type of students you're targeting, the grade levels, that's one thing that we've done. So focusing on if the university is more mid-range in terms of their rankings, then how can they focus on students that aren't necessarily going to go for the top 10, 20 UK universities and focus on them applications? How can we look for that other segment? In terms of translating websites and brochures, it's just simply not enough, because what would be a benefit, or what would be seen as admirable from a university from a British student, from an American student, might be different from a Chinese student. So you can't just translate it and kind of that would have the same merit as it would for other countries. You have to really look at what are Chinese students looking for your university in comparison to other universities within similar rankings or within a similar kind of area. One thing we've done as well is when we look around the world, we look at universities that have similar types of rankings within countries, similar types of offerings, and we don't mirror it, but we take ideas on how well they have done in terms of being able to talk to the Chinese community and to Chinese students as well. So we've taken quite a lot of that from looking at, for example, Australian universities. And then being able to take them ideas across to the UK. So defining your image, right, how you frame the university and positioning it, using the right tools, so using the right types of ads as well. You want to be using applications that, you know, are okay. You're using programmatic ads across a lot of different applications, but are they the right ones, right? So that you can keep up the university's reputation. And also be careful with numbers. So one thing that is great about programmatic advertising is really that we have applications involved, so AdMaster, for example, that allow us to monitor numbers and to make sure that the numbers are real. They're not fake, right? Some of the issues that you'll find with BBAT, so the bigger kind of platforms, or Baidu with Weibo, with WeChat, is in China, there's an incredible amount of buying going on. I think Weibo is probably the worst we've seen in terms of that. So you have to, you know, if you're looking at a campaign on the major platforms, you have to be careful of looking at, you know, is this right? Do these numbers make sense? And that's either trying to approach them more with a CPA model, which is harder and harder as of recent, or it's trying to look at how you can work with programmatic ads as well and have a mixture of the two. So the challenges that come with that, so having, you know, you're new to marketing approaches and regulations, there's lots of issues in terms of what a university can do in terms of advertising by themselves if they don't have the right licenses for education in China. So using a DSP does definitely helps. And then also number of competitors in the market is making it tough. So we have 70 to 80% of all the universities focusing on the major platforms, and then not really focusing on these smaller applications, which really have quite a lot of merit when we look at conversion. So it's how can universities look at these areas where students are focusing on, and then target better and more precisely. And also budgets, right? So there's universities that come to the market with huge budgets just to create awareness, and you know, it's difficult to compete. So it's again about finding the niche. So one thing I'm going to talk about today is about owned media, right? So WeChat, as we know, is kind of the CRM for students. One thing that I find universities also find quite difficult is the balance between talking to current students, talking to alumni, and talking to future potential students, right? Because you have 4 posts a month on a service account. Subscription accounts wouldn't be one that we recommend. Service accounts are always the best in terms of having visibility. Subscription accounts can be good, but sometimes we use a mixture where subscription accounts will be more for day-to-day and service accounts will be more for prospective students, for example. This is one thing that we've used. But another thing that you can do is through links and QR codes, you can separate the followers that you have. And there are systems, CRM systems, that allow for universities to send out different messages to different groups within their account, whether they be prospective students whether they be current students or whether they be alumni, so that the followers of the WeChat account can really feel they're engaged, right? Because it's very hard for a university to be constantly pushing out information that is very sales focused when you also want to speak to the students on your campus about things that are happening. So QR code tagging is one way that can be done. When running campaigns, having students put in what is their purpose of joining their own media, and then you can separate the tags as well. You can separate and segment your followers as well. And then following that, it allows you to speak to them individually. And as some of them move through to joining and becoming a student, you can then move across them tags so that they now join the on-campus students, and they will get that type of information. Because really what students are looking for is different, right? If we look at prospective students, they're looking at everything about the university. They want to know about policy and news updates. They want to know about the application details, kind of all the information that really for a current student has no relevance. They want to have good direct contact with the recruitment officer. So you find that universities are in this constant battle with WeChat and Weibo, where they're trying to talk to prospective students, but also at the same time give enough to both their alumni and current students, because current students are looking for things like live tips and events at the university, things that can be done in the local city, academic and career advice, things or information related to their program. So we've even, for some universities, started to look at how we could do tags based on programs, which is quite difficult, but you can separate it by certain schools so that you can give more related information around programs as well through WeChat. It's quite a challenge, but this is what tags can enable universities to do. And then finally with alumni. So they're more focused on things such as awards and recognitions. When are delegations going to be coming over to China so they can take part and become a voice for the university, bring along prospective students, and events and news and kind of memories of the university. So you have all of these different needs. And so QR code tagging is very useful for that. And this is, for example, also then we have the WeChat template message. So this allows you to send specific messages then to specific followers at specific times. So this goes even deeper than just having particular groups, right? So you can see here, we've given an example of what a message would look like, but followers can click through onto the message and it can divert to a landing page. So you might want to do individual targeting to certain followers. Maybe they've just joined, you know that they're prospective students. And so you can then run template message campaigns through WeChat to try and drive them towards a landing page of enrollment, or drive them towards a recruitment officer of some sort where they can then move to the next stage. There is no limitations on the frequency of which these messages can be sent out. And it's shocking the amount of universities that aren't yet using these as part of their final stage, as you'd have seen before in the student journey, in terms of trying to then convert potential students into students at the university. Because official service accounts, as we know, can only push out 4 messages per month. So it's about how can universities get the most out of service accounts, and how can they then engage with students depending on where they are in their journey. And how to utilize these resources. So there's a number of different ways, right? So you have university leaders, you have current students, notable alumni. These are really the voice of the university. So how do we take these differences that stand out for a university and then move them over into content marketing, campaigns and events, own media and paid media that then can help the university in terms of the recruitment, their branding, and then engagement. Another thing as well that is very important when looking at content for own media is really the question of what are students looking for? What are they interested in? So one thing that we have a lot of, we have basically a data mining tool that we've used it for e-commerce in the past, but a few years ago we started using it more for trying to understand trends in the market. So with this, we can pick up certain keywords and we can understand what are students talking about. So it may just be that we want to do a particular audit for the university. So we want to look at positive, negative, different types of feedback, discussions that are happening across social media, and then to come back and give the university feedback of what Chinese students are finding to be interesting, what problems they had when they were at the university, why did they decide to go with other universities, and what is their general perception. So this can help us in terms of doing a brand audit. It can also help us in terms of trying to look at what do students look at for reliable recommendations. What are the main sources of their information? What are the key characteristics that students look for when considering to study abroad? And what preferences do students have for specific locations for universities? Why is attending a specific institution better than other institutions? And so really, you know, there's an infinite amount of questions that we can ask here in terms of looking for particular keywords that the university can then take either as a benefit, as a USP. So they realize, wow, this is one thing that Chinese students really treasure about our university, and then can build that into campaigns. So I guess the big question really is still around paid media versus owned media, right? So owned media, as mentioned, I think a lot of universities are focusing on this. Questions are, do universities need both of them? And really the answer is yes. Universities do need to have both because they have different functions. Owned media is much more about trying to bring in prospective students, talking to current students, and it acts as a CRM system, right? Especially WeChat. Paid media is about going out, creating brand awareness. It's about helping to convert prospective students. So you have a mixture of the two, and as you'll have seen before, they very much fit together, right? But the question always is how to measure effectiveness. So if you, for example, are working with an agency on owned media and you have 7,000, 8,000 views per post, is this success? Because it depends on what your KPIs are as a university. Are you looking through your marketing spend to enroll more students? Or are you looking for your social media purely to be something that is more about validation? If it's validation, then having 7,000 to 8,000 views on a post is great and shows Chinese students that this university is very popular with other Chinese students. It shows that they have a strong media focus, media capability, and it gives a lot of validation to the university itself. But if it is for attracting more students, then how can we look at this 8,000 views and say, okay, 10% of them were actually going to help build the university for next year in terms of enrollment. And that's where I think sometimes universities need to focus more on paid media. So when we look at paid media, in China, there's three main types. There's programmatic advertising, which I'll go into quite detail in a moment about bidding through DSP. There's search engine marketing, and there's key opinion leaders. So search engine marketing is very popular in the West. We work across a number of categories, RedFern Digital. To be completely honest with you, so we are categories of education, insurance, healthcare. We do a lot of search engine marketing. Outside of them categories, because of the fallout with Alibaba, Tencent, and Baidu, we actually do no search engine marketing at all. Baidu search is just nowhere near as prevalent as Google search is in the UK. However, for education, it still does have a lot of merit. It's more expensive than using, for example, Google Ads in the UK. So that's another thing to take into account, but it is still important. So programmatic ads is different because there's a wider variety of applications that are used in China. And therefore you can have a better return when it comes to lead generation. And then finally, key opinion leaders. And so when I talk about key opinion leaders, I don't mean your lifestyle influencers that, focus on fashion and food and beverage and them kind of categories. I'm talking more about two types of influencers. One is education influencers. There are education influencers that talk about universities, that talk about which country students should go to, and which universities they find to be the best. They provide ratings, rankings, and there's also then associations, which a lot of the agencies that universities work with in China will collaborate with, and these are usually on WeChat. They're associations that essentially will give recommendations on universities for certain USPs that they may have. So these are kind of the main types of paid media that you'll find. And they have different functions as well, right? So if we look at, for example, your own media accounts and in-app promotional tools, they're much more about building awareness, focusing on community. Sorry. And then if you look at BBAT, so BBAT stands for Baidu, ByteDance, Alibaba, and Tencent. They're the major platforms in China. Universities can directly work with BBAT, unlike with the long tail advertising. So BBAT and long tail ads resources are much more focused on awareness, but also lead generation. So the way that it often works, if universities to work with us, we can give a target for the amount of signups that we would have for a particular campaign, views, and then basically it's much more focused on lead generation, because you have a single display ad, maybe a landing page, and then really it's about getting sign up. That's the whole point of them types of campaigns. Whereas with own media and in-app promotional tools, it's about building your community, getting more followers. And some of them, yes, may turn to enroll as a student, but a much smaller proportion. So yes, as I just mentioned, who are BBAT? So it's ByteDance, Baidu, Alibaba Group, and Tencent. So together they essentially own most of the major platforms that you'll have seen before when I was going through social media, so obviously such as WeChat, Weibo, Douyin, and then Baidu itself, with it being the major search engine here in China. So with these platforms, you don't go through a bidding process through a DSP. You work with them directly, right? Maybe through an agency still, but they have a different function in terms of how they work. They're great, but the thing is also you have to understand that competition is high on these platforms. So with programmatic advertising, this is essentially how it works, right? So we have, if we're looking at DSP, it's long tail ads. So you can see here from, I'll just use my mouse. You can see here, you'd have RedFern Digital as the agency, which works with DSP to essentially bring together all of the different platforms. And I'll just jump around here to show you guys how many platforms we're talking. So I mean, these are, over 50 of some of the main platforms here in the China market. Then they go across things like news, video, and social. So these are list types, they're the long tail ads, right? So basically what happens is we would agree with the university on a particular budget they would have. We then come up with the banners, we go through A/B testing, lots of different things. And based on that budget, then we start to put budget into each different program through the DSP. And what we find is we look at how things react. So we might see certain applications that are getting better response rates than others. And that will see us to steer up and change how we are working with them, where we are putting basically the budget, right? To help us hit that target, whether that be enrollment or whether that be awareness. Now, one thing that's great about this as well is that obviously AdMaster is involved. So anti-fraud, brand safety, we don't have the issues of fake buys, click-throughs and what you'll get on the major platforms. And then you have also the experience from the consumer data platform, where we already know which platforms are the best for education or for hospitality. So we can take that data and it allows us to better target the students that the university is looking for. And so that's one area. And then if not, there's always BBAT. So this is multiple buying channels. So essentially the agency, and they publish themselves. You can't go through the DSP to publish on their platforms. If you look at WeChat moment advertising, if you look at WeChat mini program advertising, or Fingsatong, Weibo promotional tool, they're all done through the platform, and universities or the agency can individually work with them through the bidding process. With the smaller ones, such as even Bilibili, for example, which I'll touch on in a moment, universities can't work directly with Bilibili to use to bid for advertising. You have to go through the DSP or through an agency with the rights to do that. So this just gives a bit of an idea of really how that system works. And so, here are all of the different types of platforms. Really, you've got to understand, okay, what am I trying to achieve from this? So if it's going to be more about lead generation, you might focus more on news, where you can have landing pages, where you can have sign-up forms, such as on Toutiao. It might be, if you're looking at video, then it's more about awareness. It might be a new brand video the university's put out, and you want to try and show this to as many people as students as possible. And it's really about, raising the profile of the university. And then with social, it might have a different purpose as well. So really, programmatic display ads, it helps universities to target multiple apps within China, and then redirect the audience to the Chinese website or the in-app landing page. So some of the programs will allow for the person that has clicked on the ad to go through to the landing page that you may have, which could be a website, depends on the form of how your recruitment process works. Or on some, such as, for example, Toutiao, it's very much their own. So Toutiao, actually, you have to work with individually. They're quite different to DSP. But as an example with Toutiao, if you go through, you have to create a landing page within their application. And the sign up happens within that app. So the agency has to then design that landing page and work with Toutiao to fulfill their needs. So Toutiao was very good. We've used them quite a bit in the past. Unfortunately, they've moved away from a CPA model, which they had before, the CPM, which is good in some ways, but not so in others, because before, for lead generation, it was very good. But now we've found that they offer this less and less for universities. Yeah, and so the audience can then receive further information and sign up as a lead if interested. So how is programmatic advertising effective as it is? So generally, we have three major data sources that we use when we're going to target students. We take the data the university has. So, I mean, we've done things in the past where we'll retarget people that had visited their site through SEM. So the university previously had run search engine marketing on Baidu. They had a number of students that had clicked through, had shown interest, and then we can retarget them, particular students, using ads. That's one example, for example, that we could use with data the university already has. It could be with followers that they have. It could be with certain webinars they've held. So we like to take that data in. Then we have our data from the DSP, so from the platform itself. So looking at, from working with previous universities, working in higher education, different attributes, interests, online behavior that we can set. So that data is also there, that it helps us to better tailor how the budget is used. And then finally, we have other sources of data, whether that be from JD.com, for example, looking at purchasing behavior and purchasing habits to see the ability for certain people, can they afford to go to university, or what are their purchasing habits? And then also how we can take data from Weibo, the likes of Weibo, Toutiao, and classify audiences by interest. So this is really how the data works in terms of helping us understand the different platforms. And also, it's not that we're always targeting students, right? We've got to remember that for undergraduate, a lot of the decision making is actually done by parents. So that's where data from JD and from Baidu that we pull in, that's where we can really understand also the parents' behavior and where they are and how we can target them, because they will have different types of ads and different types of USPs that relate to them better than the students themselves, right? So while the student might be looking at what the nightlife's like at a particular university, the parent might be looking at safety and other concerns at the university, right? So that's other ways as well we need to focus on and make sure that it's aligned depending on the strategy and the KPIs that we have for programmatic advertising. So programmatic trading strategy. So this is an example of how it generally works. So you've got to understand that we have different types of creative assets that we will make for banners. And then these ads will be displayed across a number of different platforms. So what we do is we run A/B testing on advertisement creatives for every campaign for 1 week to see how students or parents are receptive to these particular ads. So for example, if they see it or they click on it, but then we often, there's often accidental clicks. If they don't stay after clicking 3 times or it doesn't convert, then we move to the next type of ad for that particular target. So A/B testing helps us understand what types of creative work best. And also there's a number of different ways we might do this. So we might have, for example, 2 banners on one platform where we're targeting to see which one has the best reception, and we'll move forward with that style. Or it might be that we have one creative and then we have 2 different target audiences, and then we'll also test to see which one is more receptive. So we might have said previously that we think this would be more receptive from 18 to 22-year-olds. And then actually after testing it, we find out that no, it was more for undergraduates where we were getting the most responses, and they were more interested in the university. And so then we changed the bidding structure and how we work with the platforms in terms of how the money is allocated and the creative that we then choose. And then that will set the display strategy for the user lifetime and ongoing. So this is really kind of the process. And so if you look at programmatic advertising, this is an example of a native ad on Bilibili. So if I go to the next slide, this is kind of the background. So universities can't directly go into Bilibili, and they have to work through an agency in order to bid. You can see different things here in terms of campaign titles, in terms of the gender, the age. So really the specific amounts of information that you can put in. And this allows universities to really target specific groups. So this is looking at ads on Bilibili. And this is what an ad might look like, right? So you have a particular link here in among the videos. And then if the person clicks on this, so this is actually it was for a Japanese language learning institution. So if the person clicks on the link, they come through to a particular landing page. And this creative, for example, focuses on the person's level of Japanese knowledge, right? So they have 3 different options of what they can choose, a bit of a quiz. And then if they're interested on going further, that they can click through again to sign up to join the institution. So this is an example of what an ad would look like, as mentioned. And then this is how the ad is built in on the background. So there's other types of applications as well, and not all of these can be run through the kind of the long tail advertising, but you can work with them directly. One example is Toutiao. Now, one of the other issues with working with platforms directly with ones which you can, so universities can work with Toutiao without having to go through a DSP, but the problem is that you have minimum top-ups, right? So working with a DSP across numerous different platforms, you don't have minimum top-ups. You can essentially look to put in a small amount of budget and do different types of testing, and then later decide to put more on certain platforms, depending on the response that you get. Now, with Toutiao, for example, they have a minimum top-up. I forget off the top of my head, but I think it's nearer to 8,000 RMB, for example. So with that, you're committed to the platform in terms of the spend and the ads that you're going to use. So here they have a number you can see in terms of the suggested ad formats. Unfortunately, they did have a CPA model, but I believe now they're focused on CPM. So it's more about the amount of views that a particular post will get. And they have different ad formats. So you have in-feed banner ads, you have video page ads, or you have in-app video ads as well, right? So the communication strategy really for things like Toutiao is, plan a promotion for a particular course. This can be quite useful. Then design a poster linked to a landing page with key content highlighted and a prominent call to action. So things that we've done for universities is, if we're looking at, say, a mid-level or maybe a lower level in terms of rankings university, we'll even look at grades, right? So we know that we don't want to waste the amount of our views and our clicks based on students that have made the decision they're going to Oxford University, right? What we want to do is we want to focus on a particular niche. And so that's where we'll make the poster very informative on what the call to action is. And then drive this traffic to a unique landing page where then there can be a conversion and the students can fill in their details, and this inquiry will then be sent through. And so this is just, I think I've touched on this mostly. This is just some different ways in terms of how programmatic ads can be optimized. So creating weekly work in progress reports is important for campaigns, and using real time. The important thing with advertising is, it's not about running a 3-month campaign and then saying, well, how did that go? It's about how do you optimize it every week to get it stronger and stronger and to get more results from the campaigns that you're running. Programmatic advertising is about improving as you move along, and every week you should have better results from the creative that's been put into these ads and in terms of the sign up. And the changes that you would have could be time of day, daily budgets, campaign creatives, budget allocations by platforms, and then also obviously the metrics, right? So you might realize certain ages were more receptive, and then also the conversion route as well. So I'm going to speed up, so I know I'm running out of time. So some things as well that are important are such as setting up a Chinese website. This is often the question that is asked. Yes, the firewall does cause a problem for certain universities. If the website is in English and indexed on Baidu, for some that can suffice. But generally it is good to have a Chinese website where students can go through and find information. What's important though, more than anything, is that it is competitive in terms of where it stands under certain keywords on Baidu, right? So when setting up a Chinese website, there's a lot of trouble that comes with it. You have to go through getting a server, domain, ICP registration, if it's going to be hosted in mainland China. Now, if it's hosted outside of mainland China, if it's hosted in Hong Kong, for example, it's much simpler. You don't have to go through the ICP registration, police registration, and you can still link it to Baidu, and you can still carry out SEO and SEM. But the importance is that there is something there for students to search through and to find as a reliable source of information. And so with search engine marketing, the question becomes the use of this. As you'll have seen before, we looked at the major platforms, BBAT, programmatic advertising, and also search engine marketing. So search engine marketing can be very useful, but it depends on what is your expectation on the outcome, the team structure in the market as well. Because the other issue is once the leads are coming through, how are these leads being dealt with? With certain inquiries, when we've been working with universities, there's a whole flood that comes in. Are universities turning to things such as chatbots where they can effectively deal with serious inquiries? Do they have people that can help in terms of dealing with this? As an agency, we've had to hire a whole team that basically helps support our clients in insurance and education and property with inquiries that come through. And there's different ways you can deal with that. It could be with chatbots, it could be with, yes, having customer service ready, but it's making sure you get the best ROI in terms of what you're doing with SEM. So looking at team structure and also the website as well. It needs to have the right call to action. It needs to have a strong loading speed. Universities carrying out SEM with slow websites is probably one of the biggest problems, I think, today currently in China. So making sure that the website loads very quickly is very, very important to get the most out of SEM, because it's not necessarily, it can be quite expensive, right? And also then to understand your competitors and what they're bidding on, right? So which keywords should you focus on? This really affects the amount of budget that you have to put in, and then also the type of spend that you're going to be focusing on, whether it be CBC or CPA. And so KOLs are interesting in that I wouldn't say they're the strongest for universities, though we have had some successful campaigns with them in the past. You're best really looking at associations and working with very specific KOLs that focus mostly on education. I think that's the most important thing, and trying to understand are they at the right level as well. I mean, if we look at, for example, FMCG, which we work heavily, I mean, in FMCG and other categories, influencers take up 80% of our budget, right? 70, 80% of the budget, much more than programmatic advertising would. So in that case, it's understanding how can you get a solid ROI. If you're working with KOLs, usually we find on Weibo, you're looking at around the 10,000 RMB mark. On WeChat, they're usually between 10 and 20. And then on some higher level tier KOLs might be useful, but again, they need to be niche. They need to have the right audience. When working with influencers, it is important that you ask them for their back-end demographics so you can understand the age groups of their students. Some of, for example, some of them might be focusing on education, but it's a much younger demographic. So you can ask KOLs for that information, or the agency can for you. It's important you do that beforehand. So I think the key takeaways really from the presentation today is that digital marketing has become essential, but you need to make sure that you choose suitable platforms and do it the right way. It's not about having just a WeChat and Weibo account. You need to have a purpose in terms of what you're trying to achieve. In terms of how these platforms are then used, there's a lot of hidden functions in digital platforms that are important for universities. So using WeChat in the correct way, using Fengzitong on Weibo, for example, looking at how you can split your paid budgets into focusing on long tail advertisements. And also working with a full service agency as well, because generally what we all find is there's agencies that do content marketing, there's agencies that do paid media marketing, and then there's agencies that would focus more on just, for example, on the creative elements as well, right? But really what's needed is an agency that can do the events, they can help with the follow-up, they can help with the customer service, they can help with all of the elements that universities need, in terms of paid media, looking at long tail and DBAT, and then also with ongoing content support and helping to create a own media that acts as a CRM for prospective students and alumni. So yeah, so I think that's it. I think it'd be good to move on to the questions part now. Potentially, feel free to scan our QR code to join our WeChat account where we do weekly updates. We also have our magazine in there as well, which we release every quarter. In our next release, we'll be doing a particular segment on universities, which would be great to share if people are interested. And yes, thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Ryan. That was really interesting, and it's really interesting for myself as well, because I used to work for a marketing agency and kind of having an interest in China, and it's very different between the Western digital marketing and the Chinese digital marketing. And I've got a couple of questions that have come in through the chat function. Sorry, excuse me. And I've got a couple of questions of my own in case anyone, but if ever, all the participants, do feel free. We've got about 5 minutes or so left of today's session. Do feel free to write questions in the chat box if you've got, or the Q&A box if you've got anything you want to ask. One of the questions that did come in was around WeChat mini programs. I know that they're obviously very popular for companies that are trying to sell products. It's really big in e-commerce, but are universities using WeChat mini programs at all, or is there, are you aware of them using it, or is it really just for those that want to get someone to actually buy an actual product that are using WeChat mini programs?
Yeah, not really. I mean, the thing is with WeChat mini programs, they're really good for FMCG because you can have particular products and you can have live chats with potential buyers. And they serve as another kind of portal, I guess, through to your media. Now, they can be good for recruitment in some forms because, for example, when you have someone follow you on a WeChat account, yes, you can segment them and you can target them, but you can't really ask them for their information. Whereas a mini program can have things built into it so that if they want to get more information, such as a prospectus, then they have to put in their details, and that allows the university then to be able to follow up and have a discussion. So I think they do have a purpose, but they're not cheap. They can cost quite a few £1,000s. So you've got to look at your strategy. If it's going to be something where you want to put your prospectus through your mini program, you have information where people are driven to leave their details, then they can be useful. But again, you don't want to get flooded with lots of inquiries that, people just want free information and are not necessarily interested. Prospectuses are quite good because it does show some interest from a prospective student, right, in the university. But we haven't seen a huge amount of usage yet. Yeah,
I guess like you said, it's not necessarily the best tool to, because you're not actually trying to sell an actual product with the university, you're trying to sell obviously the experience and the service and everything else. So I think that makes sense. Another question that from myself personally is regarding, sort of, you talked a lot about programmatic, which I find really interesting. It's around sort of the tracking and the sort of the data that can be provided to a university when they're looking through and they're trying to justify further budget spend or kind of really back up what they're doing. I think from a perspective of someone working in an international office of the university and or the kind of international marketing officer, when they get kind of, if they do a campaign for example, using Facebook and Google and Instagram, whatever, there's quite some serious detailed analytics, and even programmatic advertising in the West. There's a lot of very detailed device use, time spent on page, what people did, using a lot of kind of, for example, double click tags, for example, or kind of those kind of tag and tracking. It's really ubiquitous in Western social media. As far as I'm aware, it's not as ubiquitous in like Chinese social media or campaigns for China. Could you give us a bit of information around what kind of, how you can benchmark if something has performed well or not? Because I think that's something that a lot of international marketing people for looking at the Chinese market might not be quite so sure that they've spent money on a campaign and they've got some data, and how has it really worked, or was it good or bad? I think that's sort of, because I think there's a limit on what you can track. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, but it depends on what you're trying to achieve, right? Like, I mean, you know, if it's more based on like CPM, so we can get the total amount of views, we can get the total amount of clicks, we can get like gender breakdowns, we can get time of day, we can get the inquiry that came through, we can get the cost per click. So, I mean, like we ran a campaign recently where we put in, I think it was like £15,000, and then you have 12 million views, about 20 pence per cost per click, 100,000 click-throughs, and then 400 students that went through to inquire with the university. I mean, you know, but it's different, right? I don't think there's really a standard that you have. And the reason why is because in the West, you have 4 or 5 major platforms where you can have these standards, and you can say, okay, that kind of worked well, or it didn't work well in comparison to another university. Whereas with programmatic advertising, we're going across hundreds of different platforms.
More fragmented, right?
Yeah. And so it's more about really what are you trying to achieve at the end, and it's harder to measure. Yeah, it is harder to measure than I mean, if for example you ran a WeChat Moments campaign, then there is more data that's provided by Tencent that will give you a good idea of whether it was a fair campaign. I mean, even when we work with like influencers on FMCG, we can give even good, relatively okay ideas on what we can get for an ROI. But when you're looking at programmatic ads, it's about how much do I want to achieve. So we'll put in numbers and say, this is what we can achieve, and this is what the cost would be. So it's a little bit different in terms of how it works.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for that. I think we're out of time for today's session. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who's still on the line. Thank you everyone who's joined us. I personally found it really interesting hearing Ryan's presentation. I hope you did too. And yeah, the recording will be made available to participants after this session, and hopefully, I'm not sure, Ryan, will you be able to share your presentation slides as well?
Yes, I would love to.
Participants. That'd be great. And yeah, so I was going to say thank you to everyone for joining, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks again, Ryan. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you. Happy Dragon Boat Festival to everyone.
Happy Dragon Boat Festival. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.